Hello and welcome back to the Greatest Games podcast. Today have my brother here with me.
Hello.
Tell the people about yourself.
I am better than my brother in every way, such as looks and intelligence. That's it.
Alright, so we're going to be doing an interview today. I've got a few questions for you about your gaming expertise. Would you consider yourself like a gamer? Or...
I would consider myself a gamer of relative skill level, depending on the games I'm playing. I'm pretty knowledgeable on video games.
That actually ties in pretty well to the first question. So what kind of games do you like playing most? Like, do you like RPGs or platformers?
I like a bunch of different kinds of games. I tend to like games with more combat oriented, like shooters, but I've never really been a fan of fighting games actually. But yeah, I like shooters. Never been a huge fan of platformers. Visual novels are pretty great though. So yeah, mostly just shooters and stuff.
Alright, any particular reasons you happen to like those genres specifically?
Well, I like games with combat because if you do things right, it makes it feel really cool. If you pull off like a good combo, you just feel awesome because you feel like you're the Terminator destroying everybody.
But you don't like fighting games where the main point is combos?
No, I can't memorize any of them. You gotta push like buttons and directions at the same time. I can't do any of that. It takes way too long.
What made you interested in video games to begin with? Like, what was the event in your lifetime that made it like, I like these things?
Well, it was when we were kids. You were with me, and we found our dad's old Nintendo 64, and we were like, "What's this?" And he's like, "Oh, it's a video game console." And we're like, "Okay, let's play with this." So we just started playing some games on it, and yeah, I think you got in trouble because you were supposed to be doing school, and we were just playing video games, and I mean, it was just a lot of fun. And from that point on, I pretty much just play video games as my main hobby.
Alright, cool. You got a favorite video game?
Well, I mean, it changes from time to time, but right now I've been playing a bunch of Terraria. It's pretty fun. Just got a new update, so I'm trying to beat all the new bosses, get all the stuff in it. It's been pretty fun.
Alright, is there a reason that you like that game specifically, or...?
Well, it's got a lot of content in it. There's a lot of strategy involved. There's a lot of different things you can do to beat the enemies and get to the end. There's a lot of really fun bosses. It's very unique, and overall, I just think it's a fun game.
Could you, like, explain a little more in depth? Like, for example, you mentioned bosses. Are there any specific bosses that come to mind?
I've always liked Duke Fishon, which is basically just you fish in the sea with special bait, and this giant fish pig demon comes out and attacks you with tornadoes. It's a pretty cool boss, and he gives some of the best loot in the game. He's also a very tough boss to beat, so I like him a lot.
Alright, and you also mentioned, like, strategies and items.
Yeah, there's a lot of weapons in the game and a lot of different armor sets that give specific bonuses, so you can combine a lot of different things to try and get good. One combo that was really popular for a while was Razor Pine and Spectre armor, because you would heal so fast with the buff that you would basically be invincible. So a lot of stuff like that. Just finding the cool combos of how to like work around some of the tougher parts of the game.
Alright. Suppose there's a Terraria fan listening right now. What would you tell them if they just, like, were really bad at the game and they couldn't figure out how to get better? Like, what's your pro tips for being good at Terraria?
Well, it really depends on what point you are in the game and what class you're being. But I would say most of all, potions are very important. I didn't use potions the first time I went through the game. It's much more difficult if you don't have potions. Also, pick a class. Using one or two of every different class's items will get you a bit through the first parts of the game, but towards the end, you're going to want to hone down on one of the specific classes that has dedicated items to it, because that'll get you a lot stronger in the long run.
Do you have any specific recommendations on, like, extra good potions or classes, or just pick whatever you feel like playing with?
Well, classes, as is intended, I think, are pretty much any class is good. They all have their different strengths and weaknesses. For potions, I would say it changes a bit on class, but Swiftness, Iron Skin, and Wrath potions are pretty good. Another thing is your world corruption is very important, which one you want. I would recommend the Crimson. I just think it's better because you can get the Vampire Knives, which are a lifesteal weapon, as well as there's a few other things, but it's really good. The really only advantage that the corruption has is you can get the fish for the Wrath potions, which is an amazing potion. But other than that, I would say Crimson is probably the better corruption.
Alright, cool. So, this has been, this subject has been around for a while, but what is your opinion on the whole topic of, like, video games make people more violent? Like, in the news, when they're school shooters, they often mention, like, oh, they played such and such shooter game. Like, what's your opinion on that whole matter?
Frankly, I think it's ridiculous. I don't think that video games cause more violence. I think there's a chance that they can get you agitated if you play them. With most things, you can have too much. If you're playing video games 24/7, days straight, not sleeping, then obviously, you should stop doing that. You can get addicted to video games, which I think is where the bad press comes from. But I think overall, it's just a fun hobby, like with any other thing, like board games or television. Just do it in moderation, like with all things.
Alright, so your stance is more of the unhealthy addiction rather than the video game specifically?
Yes, I think that it's more people doing it too much than the actual games themselves.
Alright, interestingly, there's actually been recently a few counter studies that have come up with information that seems to contradict these earlier studies and say that video games actually make people less violent. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm not really sure. I haven't seen many of the studies.
Mainly, they say, like, it's a good outlet for, like, anger or whatnot.
Yeah, I would say that's a tough one. I haven't seen many of the studies, but I would say unlikely. It's possible, I would say, with some games more than others, but I would say, like, relaxing video games might be better because you're chill and you're relaxing, so that might be it. But I feel like if you play, like, a really violent video game, you're not going to get less angry. But I don't know, maybe. I haven't seen the study, so I really don't have too much knowledge on the subject.
Alright, cool. How familiar are you with Pokemon Sword and Shield?
Not very. I've seen the trailers. I've never actually played the game, but I saw the trailers while it was coming out, but I haven't seen that much about the game itself.
Alright, do you know about the National Dex controversy that happened with the game near its launch? Have you heard of that?
I can't say I do.
Oh, alright. Well, it was basically this big, controversy where Game Freak, the company who makes the Pokemon games, decided that they were going to take out about half of the Pokemon that currently exist.
Yes, I have heard
and,
of it.
They said that would allow them to focus more on animation and textures and whatnot for the other Pokemon, but people ended up finding information that seemed to contradict that. For example, they found some models that were just taken from previous Pokemon games and weren't updated at all. So, what are your thoughts on this? Do you think it's Game Freak just being lazy, or do you think people are just not noticing the actual changes they make and how hard it is to make a new Pokemon game?
Well, I mean, I don't know too much about it, but I would say if they are reusing models, then, like, you can make new models that are nicer, and then just use the old models from the last game for the Pokemon that you don't want to port over and make them look nice. But I would understand them not wanting to do that, like, have a bunch of nice, really high-resolution Pokemon with these nice animations, and then you just have this Mewtwo in there that just looks not nearly as good as everything else in the game. But I would say if they are using Pokemon models from old games, that I really don't understand why they wouldn't add some of the Pokemon into the new game. Especially some of the ones that they did.
Alright, so your stance is that they should either keep all the Pokemon in, or actually, like, make really nice looking models and animations for the ones that they do keep in?
Yes, I would say that I would lean more towards they should keep all the Pokemon in the game, especially for competitively, because I do think that they took out some of the better Pokemon that people would tend to use in tournaments, and I think that, it would be better if they left it in so people could really competitively play Pokemon Sword and Shield.
Right, that's actually really interesting, because some people are making the argument that this whole National Dex controversy is actually a good thing, because it mixes up the competitive climate of the game, so people aren't just using the same old overpowered Pokemon that have been in the games for decades, and they're actually almost being forced to use new Pokemon that could be competitively viable because those Pokemon aren't compatible with the game anymore.
Yeah, well, I would say it's interesting. It definitely forces people to get more creative and not just have Mewtwo on your team and all the other legendaries that are super powerful. It makes people more creative, and I would say it spices things up, but it's like playing Smash with items. It definitely makes things more interesting and forces people to get more creative, but it's not quite as competitive as, I would say, obviously the stereotype of all Fox, Final Destination, no items. But I would say it forces people to get creative and get outside their comfort zone a little bit, which it's nice in its own way.
Alright, so you're saying that it could be a good thing for the competitive climate of Pokemon that they got rid of a whole bunch of Pokemon?
I would say more, it's a fun thing in its own right. I would say it's two separate things. You got the hardcore competitive Pokemon players, and then you got the new ones that are playing with this limited cast of characters, almost kind of like a handicap to see how people figure out ways to make these new Pokemon work well.
Alright. So you're saying it sort of evens the playing field between newer players that are maybe less experienced and veteran players that know all the ins and outs of...
Yeah, I would say that this would be a better way for new players to come in, which might have been Game Freak's original idea, because obviously there's, like, all this complicated stuff there's hundreds of Pokemon, and then you can, like, breed them with special stats and stuff. It's very complicated, so it's really hard for new players to really compete with some of the more hardcore players, which could be considered a good thing because you want to have people that are dedicated, practice and stuff, but I would say that this is a better way for new players to get into Pokemon.
Alright, that's interesting. I actually haven't heard that argument about this before, so that's really neat. Shifting topics, once again, I was wondering, what do you think about maybe like starting a YouTube channel or even say a podcast about gaming? Would you be interested in doing something like that? Do you think that would be fun, or would you rather just stay out of that whole thing?
Well, I've always wanted to have, not always, but ever since I was a little kid, I've wanted to have a YouTube channel about video games, and I've never been a huge fan of making a podcast. It's not really something I've ever thought about it, but it's definitely something...
They're pretty neat, I must say.
Yeah.
As a completely unbiased spectator, gaming podcasts are top-notch.
Yeah, I don't know. I've only heard of one, and I would say it's subpar at best. But yeah, I've YouTube channel I would probably lean to more. Like playing video games, like Let's Plays, and then like game reviews, and of course talking about things like the Pokemon International Pokedex controversy, stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, I'd be open to a podcast probably at some point.
Alright, cool. So,
Getting meta in here, talking about podcasts on a podcast.
I have no idea what you're talking about. Alright, so,
we're just in this ethereal dimension that we can't see anything, we can just talk.
So, Um, Legend of Zelda CDI
Oh
is
man, this
it's
is a good one.
it's often considered
The best Zelda game.
one of the worst Zelda trilogies of all
I don't
time.
know what you're talking about.
And the games are considered very poor games. So this is sort of a two-part question. One, what is your opinion of the games? And two, if you do agree with the majority and think that these games are just horrendously bad, is there anything that the mainline Zelda games could learn from it? Like, is there any upsides, or are they just completely bad?
Honestly, I think they're masterpieces of games. They're just perfect in every way. No, I agree with the majority that these are dumpster fires of games. They're just awful in every way. Something the mainline games could learn from it. I think there's not a lot of things these games did right, if anything. I would say that in the second game, and I guess the third one too, that it was kind of cool to play as Zelda. I thought that was cool. Zelda saving Link, I thought was a nice twist on it, and I think that would be a fun mainline game, is if you, because the story of Zelda is the Legend of Zelda is that Link and Zelda get reincarnated every time in the story, and I think it'd be neat if, like, for one time in the iteration of the timeline, that Zelda saved Link, and Link was the one captured by Ganon. I think that would be cool, but I'm pretty sure that's it for the CDI games. They were just bad.
Alright, yeah, I could see the appeal of a Zelda game. I've actually heard a lot of people talk about Zelda as the main character in one game. I've heard people jokingly refer to the fact that the games are called The Legend of Zelda, and if Zelda was in charge, it could be The Legend of Link.
Yeah, The Legend of Link. That'd be funny.
Although I have heard two different opinions. Some people think it would be better if it was just a normal Legend of Zelda game, you just happen to be playing as Zelda, and then there's other opinions that think they should change the gameplay style up, maybe even make an Assassin's Creed type of game where you play as Sheik, for example. Which do you think would be better?
Well, it's tough to know without actually seeing games, because obviously they aren't existing yet at this point in time, but I feel like it'd be... I like the standard games, and I also like Assassin's Creed. They're both fun games. I feel like I think the normal style would kind of ease people into the idea, and maybe you could have, like, a few sections that are like Assassin's Creed, because, like, Breath of the Wild, for instance, you have sections where you can stealth through and, like, kill the enemies sneakily, and it's pretty fun like that. Like, while I was playing the game, you can invade the skull camps. You can, like, take out the guards and then shoot an explosive into their camp and blow it up, and it's pretty fun.
Yeah, that game specifically seems like it's more like open world, like you can kill, like if you come across a group of enemies, you can kill them in a whole bunch of different ways, and you sort of just get a pick. Do you think something like that would work for the game?
Frankly, it would depend on how they did it. Obviously, we know that Breath of the Wild 2 is coming out, and I don't know how that game works. Who knows, maybe that will be a Zelda-central Legend of Zelda game. But, I think that, in my opinion, Breath of the Wild is one of, if not the best Zelda game. So if they did it right, I think that could definitely work, because that game is amazing. So I think that, that style could definitely work if done right.
Alright. Nice. One last question. Worst game that you have ever played? Go.
I think that would have to be, and you know this game, is M&M Racing for the Wii. That game was the worst, I think, because it just had the worst... It was trying to do motion controls, like Mario Kart, but it was the most unresponsive piece of garbage, and the sound design was horrific, and it was just awful in pretty much every way. And, like, you could get new cars, but you had to get, like, thousands of coins, but you could only pick up, like, 15 coins in a level, partially because of the terrible controls. So,
Yeah.
it was really just awful.
Yeah, licensed games generally have, like, a reputation for being bad. Funnily enough, video game movies also have a reputation for being bad, so maybe the separate media should just stay in their own zones and not cross over as much.
Yeah, just keep movies and shows and the movies and shows and video games and keep them separate. Although I will say that we have been getting some good video game movies recently, such as Detective Pikachu and Sonic the Hedgehog came out recently, which I would say were both pretty good movies. I would say they were really enjoyable. I think.
Interesting. Is there anything specifically about them that you thought was better than other video game movies, or just in general?
Well, I mean, obviously in general they were just better because they were like funny and stuff. But specifically, I would say, one, they didn't take themselves too seriously. Like with Detective Pikachu, obviously, you have Ryan Reynolds voicing Pikachu, which was pretty funny.
Yeah. A lot of other video game movies generally try to, like, copy the format of the video game very closely, and that generally doesn't work because video games are meant to be played, obviously, and movies are meant to be watched, so it doesn't totally...
It doesn't blend well. What makes for good gameplay doesn't necessarily make a good story, and a good story doesn't necessarily make good gameplay. But I will say with those two movies, one, they didn't take themselves too seriously, and two, they were trying to be their own thing. They weren't trying to be exactly the games. Like with Detective Pikachu, I don't know that much about the actual Detective Pikachu games, but they weren't following the normal Pokemon plot of a kid who grows up wanting to be a Pokemon trainer, and he gets his first Pokemon and goes out into the world and tries to make his way and be the very best like no one ever was. It was a different story where the main guy doesn't even want a Pokemon. And with Sonic, it was Sonic going to our world, which, as much as it's very cliche and it doesn't sound like a good movie, but it actually was pretty enjoyable, I would say.
It sounds like the Smurfs live-action movies, just redone with Sonic.
Yeah, they just added some fur onto the Smurfs, kept them blue, and made them go fast. But, no, it was actually a pretty good movie.
Alright, so, about, like, a decade ago, comic book movies sort of went through, like, a renaissance, right? Before then, they were, like, sort of jokes, no one took them seriously, they didn't do great at the box office, and now, mainly because of Disney's Marvel movies, superhero movies can make $1 billion at the box office. Do you think video game movies are going down that route now, or do you think it was just a couple of video game movies happened to be good?
I'm not sure. Frankly, I think it really just depends on how good the movies are in the future. I think they definitely have the possibility to be better, but I'm not sure. Although I do think it's interesting that you said the Marvel movies were the main thing that jump-started the superhero movies, because I've always kind of thought that it was the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. I've always really believed that those were the main movies that brought back the superhero genre.
I could see that. I was thinking more along the lines of Iron Man, but...
Yeah, that was a very popular movie, and I feel like that was more of a jumpstart for the MCU, more than Spider-Man, Marvel movies in general, and just superhero movies.
Alright, cool. So, yeah, I think that's about it. Is there anything else you would like to tell the great people of the Greatest Games podcast audience?
Not really. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention when you asked my favorite game is another game that's consistently at the top of my favorite games list is Danganronpa. That's another really good game that's often my favorite. Right now, I think it's a tie between that and Terraria, but I would say Danganronpa is a very good game that deserves a lot of attention.
Alright, cool. Well, thank you for coming on the podcast. Maybe I can have you on again sometimes.
Maybe.
I guess it depends on how well this one does.
Yeah, if people like my beautiful voice. It's very beautiful.
Alright, well, thank you for coming on to the podcast.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Greatest Games podcast. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. Thank you.